Hello, and welcome back to Constitutional Fraud. I'm your host, William Toppi. In this defining episode of the series, we'll explore my motion for a new trial and the questionable actions of Judge David Ricciardone in a Massachusetts Superior Court. When confronted with the undeniable truth that he breached the defendant's constitutional rights through deceptive practices during the plea bargaining process, we witness how he then denies a pro se motion for a new trial. The narrative unravels the intricate layers of legal deceit and the repercussions of challenging a system that often thrives on opacity. In this episode of Constitutional Fraud, we focus on a critical juncture in the legal proceedings, a moment that lays bare the systemic fraud embedded in this case. On December 17, 2014, just before the sentencing, Judge David Ricciardone, entrusted with upholding the law and ethical standards, veered from his judicial obligations. Ricciardone, in apparent disregard for the legal framework, violated Rule 12 of Massachusetts law governing plea bargaining. Mind you, this man is lectured abroad as an expert in the plea bargaining process. This judge informed the defendant that he could withdraw his plea if the judge made a mistake or an unjust judgment, as we explored in Episode 6, The Waiver of Rights. However, Ricciardone's mistake wasn't an error at all. It was a deliberate act of fraud. He led me to believe in the adherence to established guidelines, only to hand down an unprecedented sentence, leaving me disillusioned by a false belief in established laws. Then, he proceeded to negotiate the terms of the sentence directly with me in open court, using deception. Harmful systematic error unfolded as the judge set aside the guidelines he just claimed to be adhering to, sentencing me on count 2 larceny, a disparate sentence without any precedent in Massachusetts legal history. Moreover, the absence of a restitution hearing at sentencing obscured what exactly was stolen, leaving me without clarity about what I was actually being punished for. The deception in the judge's actions, making a false assertion within the core of his judicial duties, fundamentally challenges the integrity of the legal proceedings, rendering the conviction obtained under fraudulent conditions. This unequivocal fact raises critical questions about the legitimacy of the entire process. In the context of my legal case, the pivotal moment of Judge David Ricciardone's deceptive conduct during the waiver of rights becomes a blatant violation of constitutional principles. By falsely asserting adherence to established guidelines and subsequently engaging in a private negotiation of sentencing terms with me, Ricciardone not only breached procedural rules, but also violated the due process rights enshrined in our United States Constitution. His intentional dissemination of false information to a defendant undermines the bedrock of fairness and transparency that the Constitution demands in legal proceedings. This deliberate act of deception transforms the legal process into a charade, rendering any resulting conviction as tainted and obtained under fraudulent conditions. In essence, this is a direct assault on the constitutional guarantees of due process, a fundamental pillar of our justice system. So again, I'll ask you, why am I on YouTube talking about petitioning the Massachusetts governor for a pardon, when this case was investigated by the Massachusetts Committee for Public Counsel Services? A motion was filed for a new trial. An appeal was filed with the Massachusetts Appeals Court, and a further appellate review motion, FA motion, was filed with the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And if that wasn't enough, a writ of certiorari was also filed with the United States Supreme Court. And finally, a complaint was filed with the Massachusetts Commission on Judicial Conduct. And besides the invitation to a non-evidentiary Zoom hearing that Ricciardone will invite me to in this episode, there has never been any other hearings allowed in this case. And now a word from our sponsor. This episode of Constitutional Fraud is brought to you by integrity, as defined in Black's Law Dictionary as soundness of moral principle and character, as shown by one person dealing with others in the making and performance of contracts, and fidelity and honesty in the discharge of trusts. Now back to our episode. In the aftermath of the restitution hearing in 2017, as we discussed in our previous episode, the weight of the extended probation, looming threats of imprisonment, and the continuous legal battles at the end of 2018 created an unbearable burden. In 2019, the scars of isolation and fear had already taken root. The year unfolded as a chapter of desperation as I reached out to attorneys only to face rejection and abandonment. This sense of abandonment and the ensuing isolation became my inescapable reality. It pushed me to the margins of society, where the disguise of a middle-aged white man became both a literal and metaphorical shield against the societal stigma attached to my case. The struggle to find employment and build connections intensified, and the weight of isolation became an insurmountable challenge, casting a shadow on the principles of justice and fairness that our legal system promises to uphold. Then, 2020 unfolded with tragic mass shootings and societal unrest, echoing my own anger. Yet unlike those who resorted to violence, my battle was being waged within the very structure of our laws by a judiciary that wielded power unjustly. Amidst the backdrop, the plight of Black men and women subjected to violence by authority resonated deeply, mirroring my own struggles after being stripped of my rights and my dignity. The irony of my white identity amplifying the resonance of systemic racial injustice was not lost on me. Then, in the haunting shadows of the COVID pandemic, a world veiled in masks found its reflection in my own isolation and fears. Amidst the ethical and moral obligations of a nation, the narrative of one man's injustice became emblematic of a society grappling with a crisis of truth and authority. It was within this context, on July 16, 2020, that I filed my Rule 30 motion for a new trial, a detailed expression of my frustrations with a judicial system that seemed riddled with corruption. Astonishingly, within a mere 2 weeks, the Massachusetts court, wielded by David Ricciardone, swiftly mandated a procedural order compelling the Commonwealth to respond to my motion by September 14th of 2020. The response arrived promptly on the designated day, delivered to me by mail. However, what transpired next was nothing short of yet another procedural anomaly. In direct violation of the established rules governing Rule 30 motions, which stipulate that the parties shall have 30 days' notice of any hearings, the following morning, precisely at 8:36 a.m. on September 15th, I found an email from the court waiting for me. The content of this email, as I'm about to share, was an invitation from Judge David Ricciardone himself to a hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. that very day. Let's take a look. Okay. So on July 16th, 2020, I filed a Rule 30 motion for a new trial which stated, "Now comes the defendant pro se and moves this court pursuant to Mass Rules of Criminal Procedure 30B to allow him to withdraw his guilty plea. As grounds therefore, the defendant states that his plea was taken in violation of his rights secured under the constitutions and laws of the United States and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, specifically the right to counsel, due process, and any and all rights secured and entitled." And 2 weeks later, on July 31st, I received this procedural order that is stated, "The defendant has filed a motion for post-conviction relief. The court orders that the Commonwealth file a response to the defendant's pending motion on or before September 14th, 2020. It says the charge is B&E building daytime, which is odd because I was actually imprisoned for larceny and given probation for breaking and entering. That was, so on September 14th, I received in the mail the Commonwealth's reply. The very next morning, September 15th, at 8:36 a.m., I got this email that said, it's from Marissa Ciappini, and it says, "Good morning. Judge Ricciardone would like to hold a non-evidentiary hearing via Zoom today at 2 p.m. Are both parties available? Please let me know as soon as possible." I replied, "I do not have access to Zoom. Furthermore, I believe that Judge Ricciardone should recuse himself from this case." And then the district attorney, Krista Elliott, replied, "Good morning, Ms. Ciappini. I am available to appear for the Commonwealth via Zoom at 2 p.m. That was at 9:54 a.m. Then I got this reply at 10:11 a.m. "Good morning. The hearing is not going to be held today. We will notify when or if a future date is scheduled. Thank you, Marissa." And then I made the last reply at 10:16 a.m. and it states, "Thank you. I only received the ADA's reply yesterday. Not only did I not have time to prepare, I have no access to Zoom and do not know how to use it, as well as my belief that Judge Ricciardone's impartiality is in question as regards to this case." That was September 15th. On September 18th, I got this, denied without a hearing. After review of the submissions and attached exhibits, I find that the defendant has failed to raise a substantial issue warranting further hearing. A motion for a new trial will be allowed, in quotes, if it appears that justice may not have been done. Mass Rules of Criminal Procedure 30B. Despite the passage of almost 6 years, I recall the facts of this case and the plea in which I was convinced not to impose the Commonwealth's recommendation. Mr. Toppi's factual disagreements and accusations leveled at those involved here, though protracted, fail to provide rational support for the claims that plea counsel was ineffective, or that his plea was anything but knowing, intelligent, and voluntary when made. Accordingly, I cannot conclude that justice was not done. I then filed several motions for a motion for findings of facts and conclusions of law, which was denied. I filed a motion to consolidate both the restitution appeal and this denial for a new trial which was denied. And then I filed a motion to disqualify and recuse the judge, which he also denied, stating, applying the Lena standard, the Lena test, in the circumstances of this case, the undersigned finds no basis for the disqualification requested. As the plea judge, it was appropriate for me to decide the defendant's motion, and he may address his disagreement with that decision via any appellate procedure available. Right? This episode casts a stark light on the duplicitous sentencing by Judge David Ricciardone, a masterclass in deception where established rules and guidelines were a mere illusion. The narrative braids personal and societal woes, exposing parallels between Ricciardone's choices and the systemic issues corroding authority. His assertion that my plea was knowing, intelligent, and voluntary when made, despite his prior deception, lays bare the legal malfeasance that not only stains my story, but reflects a broader crisis of truth and authority within our justice system. This episode unravels the ethical quagmire and moral bankruptcy, unmasking a narrative of injustice that transcends one man's plight to reveal the rot within the heart of our legal system. In the aftermath of these events, it's abundantly clear that Judge David Ricciardone's decisions are emblematic of a systemic issue, a blatant disregard for justice, and a manipulation of the legal system to serve personal agendas. His denial of a legitimate hearing, his rapid push for a Zoom meeting, and his dismissive response to legitimate concerns about impartiality are all part of a pattern. This isn't just about my fight. It's a fight for the very principles of our Constitution is supposed to uphold. It's a fight against the illusion that justice is blind, when it's often yielded by those who seem to only see what suits their interests. As we delve deeper into the layers of constitutional fraud, the question isn't just about my innocence. It's about the erosion of our collective rights and the urgent need for reform. Join me in our next episode, The Appeal, where we'll examine how constitutional fraud is an everyday facet of the Massachusetts criminal justice system. I'm your host, William Toppi. Our pursuit of justice begins with you.